What's up guys, Captain Blade J52 here, and today's video comes to us at the request of a viewer, a Mr. Christopher Flynn on YouTube, and essentially he wanted the ship to be made into an unstoppable tanking machine, and the issue he was having that I was able to gather is he had the threat generation there, but he needed some additional help in the damage negation and damage recovery departments to help keep the ship alive. And he kind of wanted to see what would I do with the ship in that regard. Now, the only other real stipulation that he had was he wanted it to be based in either anti-proton, disruptor, or I think phaser was the third energy type that he said. Mainly because he already has some bits of gear for those energy types, and it wouldn't cost him as much as far as resource investment wise to get what he would need in that regard for the build. But otherwise, I had free reign, make it an unstoppable tanking machine, and do what we do here on the channel, where we take pretty much any ship and we can make it into a tank. Now, for this particular build, I didn't just throw a bunch of clickable abilities at him because I didn't want ability bloat to happen. And the reason I didn't throw too many clickable abilities aside from the ability bloat thing is, I didn't want to overwhelm the guy with that kind of stuff. The thing with ability bloat is oftentimes if you have a lot of clickable powers in that regard, the big thing I've noticed is it can confuse people a lot. If maybe you're looking for, okay, I need to find this ability, click that, and that's time that you could be better spent focused on the battlefield, keeping your ship alive, or so on. So I didn't throw a billion different clickies at him. He has enough tools to work with that he'll do well with this build in my opinion, but I also left room that he could pick up some additional healing abilities and additional damage negation if he thinks it's needed. That'll be up to him in that regard, and I can help him adjust the build down the road if that's something he wants to do. But getting into our ship, this is the 31st Century Dreadnought. This is a faction-neutral ship that anybody in the game can actually fly, regardless of your faction, whether you're a Fed, a Romulan, a Jem'Hadar, a KDF, doesn't matter. Everybody can fly this. This also comes from the 31st Century Temporal Ship Pack with the Ouroboros and the Eternal Multi-Mission. So, very nice ships if you pick them up. Now, getting into our build, we'll take a quick look at our Mastery package. We have Rapid Repairs for a bit of free healing potential. We have the Enhanced Hull Plating for free damage reduction. The Devastating Weaponry for free critical chance. The Armored Hull for some free HP, and then finally our last thing is our Trade Unlock, which is the Exotic Modulation. Whenever we have that slotted, anytime we hit Directed Energy Modulation or a Temporal Power, we get a 20% Category 2 bonus exotic damage. So if you're somebody that appreciates science powers and you're looking to do a lot of exotic damage, this trait is a must-have in my opinion. This is something I see a lot of people talking about, so if you're looking for a good science trait, this is one you're going to want to consider. Now, getting into our gear, I based it in anti-proton to kind of mix it up a little bit, because we don't really feature a lot of anti-proton here on the channel. It's just not really an energy type I've done a lot with. It's, I don't know, it's just, some people have certain energy types they like, some energy types they just don't do a lot with, and for me, this is one that I don't normally do a lot with. So that's kind of why I wanted to go with this one. And also for the fact that a lot of temporal ships do kind of use anti-proton that I've seen, so there is that. Now, as far as our forward weapons go, we have our Temporal Defense Chronoton Beam. This is going to give us our Chronoton stabilization whenever it procs, which is going to give us a bit of flight speed and turn rate. It's also going to give us some shield resistance that can stack up to 5 times, and give us a bit of cooldown reduction on our buffs, which is always going to be nice to have. Then we have the first of our alternate energy type weapons, and this particular weapon comes from our Delta reputation. This is going to complete our 3-piece neutronic set, which is going to give us the isokinetic cannon. We'll take a look at our set bonuses in just a minute. Now, the big draw to this beam is the radiation damage that it's going to do in that regard, which can debuff our foes for a pretty substantial amount. So, yeah, they're going to feel it when they get debuffed by this thing. Now, the next beam we have up front is our anti-proton... I keep wanting to say antimatter for this. It's the anti-proton matter conversion beam array. There we go, finally got it out. And this particular beam came originally from a crystalline event. You can now pick this up in the MUD's marketplace. Last time I had checked. Now, the big thing I will say for the MUD's marketplace, same thing I said in the Vizier video, do not buy stuff out of the MUD's marketplace for full price. It is not worth it at those rates that they have. Wait for a sale to pop up if you want to pick up this beam, and then snatch it up. There are regular rotating sales in the MUD's marketplace, so never, ever, ever pay full price in the MUD's market. It is not worth it, and you will be able to get it on sale at some point, as there are regular rotating sales in there. But with that little spiel out of the way, the strength to this particular beam is that it's going to give a bit of healing whenever it goes off, as well as debuffing the enemy for damage resistance for 30 seconds, potentially up to 50 damage resistance across the board. Energy damage resistance, I should say. So, potentially it's debuffing foes for resistance, and it's also healing you at the same time, so it's a very good beam to have in that regard. And if you have access to this thing, then I recommend it as one of the beams you consider for a tank. Now we have our anti-proton beam arrays, 3 of the crafted ones in the back. These are standard crafted anti-protons with pen modifiers on them. That's going to allow us to bypass some extra armor for a little bit. Then for the last beam, we have our Herald anti-proton beam. Now what makes these so special is the proc that they have on them. They can give you up to 3 stacks of a Category 2 energy damage bonus. So you get 7% for each proc, stacking up to 3 times. So up to a 21% bonus energy damage to self for 20 seconds. So if you're getting procs, like hopefully you will be, then this is just that much more extra damage and that much more threat generation going out for you. So you're going to generate extra threat, and you're going to kick them in the pants just that much harder. So that's what we have in that regard. Now we'll take a look at our final weapon, which is our neutronic torpedo launcher. Now normally I wouldn't call on the neutronic set for this particular build, or for a build like this I should say, but again I kind of wanted to mix it up in that regard. And a good thing about the neutronic torpedo is it zaps enemy power. It's going to zap some of their subsystem power across the board, so a minus 28.2 across the board, which is very, very great. Plays well with Polaron power drain as well, so that's very nice. And it also debuffs them for a minus 21 power transfer rate for the 6 seconds. So not only are you taking away some of the power that they have to smack you with, you're also taking away some of their power transfer, making it harder for them to regenerate their energy, which is going to be very nice in some firefights and in a really big pinch. Now, another alternate type of anti-proton that could potentially be used here is the Voth anti-proton for the damage debuffing they do to enemies as well. So it just kind of depends on what he's going to have available and what he really wants to do. Again, I didn't want to throw 1,000,001 different things at him in that regard, so this is what we have for our weapons. Now for our shields, engines, deflector, and warp core. Now for the warp core, I still used the Kobali stabilizing core. mainly for the shield capacitor that it has in that regard. That's going to be a nice little something that he could regen his shields in a pinch if he wanted to in this case. Now, if he doesn't have access to the Samsar, then there's other variations of this we could use. There's different warp cores that we could call on. Potentially even the full 4-piece Lucari set from the Reputation, which will give similar levels of healing to the Kobali set, just in a bit more heal over time type of fashion. Now for our shields, engines, and deflector, we went with the Jem'Hadar set on this. Now the Jem'Hadar set, this is the one from the Operation Gamma mission and Boldly They Rode. So you get this for free if you're any kind of Jem'Hadar Dominion tune, and also from that old mission, and it is still a very viable set even in today's game. Now I have it re-rolled a little bit. It's got 2 Res-All mods on it. This should give us a 20% across the board damage reduction to shields, assuming that I'm remembering right and those actually stack. But so we have this in that regard, so that's going to guarantee that no matter what he's going against, he's going to have some damage reduction to his shields. Doesn't matter who or what he's fighting. He's going to reduce some damage to the shields. It also gives some extra resistances to kinetic and subsystem offline type of effects, which are going to be very nice for him as well. Now, the Jem'Hadar engines on their own, they're not really anything special in that regard. They do give some nice effects, so you could get a little bit of extra weapon power in that regard. There's the Aux mod that I've re-rolled that into, so that even if his engines get knocked out, he still has at least 25% of his speed. So no matter what, he's going to be able to move with these engines. They're not going to be able to lock him into place. And finally, we have our deflector, which is our Jem'Hadar deflector. Now, I didn't really touch the mods on this one except for one of them. I re-rolled that to a Crit X, Drain X in this regard to give him a bit more control, since we do have a gravity well on the build. This is going to let him control the battlefield a little bit better in that regard, and especially in combination with some of the other powers that are on the ship. So if he needs to pop a gravity well to group foes up and better control them, he's going to have this extra bit of control expertise to help with that. Now, the deflector on its own is very nice. Again, my personal opinion is that most primary deflectors are purely stat sticks in this regard. This one is no exception, but you're actually getting quite a bit of bang for your buck when it comes to control expertise on this. Now, touching base on our set bonuses for this. Now, the 2 set bonus isn't really going to help him that much, but it is worthy of making a note of. You've got a little bit of Polaron damage. That's not going to help him since he's not running Polaron, but he is going to get some extra drain expertise. So any kind of drain-based powers he may have, or abilities that he may put on the ship, he'll have this to draw from. And then the anti-proton sweep, which is a nice little debuff and shield drain to foes as well. So he's got some options when it comes to sets. Now, if he thinks the Jem'Hadar set is not enough in this regard, he wants something more than just the damage reduction the Jem'Hadar set is going to give, then the next step up from that would be potentially the Soul Defense set. Then from there, either 4-piece Kobali or the 4-piece Lucari. It just depends on which way he wants to go with the heals. Does he want something more bursty, or does he want something that's more heal over time focused? Now, as far as devices go, like I always tell people, they're pretty much personal preference. There is no right or wrong answer to what devices to use in that regard. Now, some of the ones that I use are the Energy Amplifier batteries for their Cat 2 damage bonus. Category 2 meaning that it comes in after calculations. Category 1 being strictly a base damage type of buff. Typically, if it says plus bonus, that is typically going to be a Cat 2. Then we have the red matter capacitor, which is something you can get from our Phoenix packs now. I believe it is a very rare token, so not too terribly hard to get one of those for the red matter capacitor, or off of the jellyfish ship if you're somebody that has that. Temporal Negotiator I have on there as well for the benefits that it can give. It's from our temporal event. Or no, actually I take that back. I think this one was a Delta recruit thing. I don't remember exactly which one this come from off the top of my head, but it's one of these special recruitment type of events. So there's also Geminite Hardpoints, Deuterium Surplus. It really depends on what he has available and what he's going to want to use. Again, there is no right or wrong answer in this, except maybe for not having any devices at all, but that's another can of worms entirely. Now, getting into our consoles, we'll start with our science and our tactical, since they're the easiest to explain. Now, our tactical consoles, because we're already at a decent amount of critical chance in the build anyway, we went with exploiters to raise our critical severity. Now, the ones I have on the build are plus beam. That's because I keep a set of generalized consoles with me, so I can use any ship at any time. So he'll probably want to use, strictly anti-proton in this case, but I have these because, well, I'm lazy and don't want to buy more stuff than I have to when it comes to this game. But that aside, you can see here, if we scroll down, there's actually 20% chance in the build resting, and nearly 170%, it's 167.6% severity. So decent amounts in that regard. Now, for our science consoles, we have the Temporal Disentanglement Suite. This is going to give some shield capacity, some aux power, a little bit of shield resistance, and the big draw here is some critical chance and severity based on aux power up to a certain maximum. We have our Tachyokinetic Converter for the critical chance and severity it's going to give, as well as the flight turn rate, and a bit of extra control expertise. So this is going to help that gravity well out quite a bit in this case. So he's going to have a decent gravity well on the build. So that's one thing we're going to be looking at in a minute. Then we have our binaural infusion circuits for our hull capacity. Again, more control expertise, but also for the critical severity. This is still, at the time of filming this, the most potent console in the game when it comes to a single console bonus worth of critical severity. So these two consoles are going to be able to pick up their control expertise and benefit to the ship that normally might not be the greatest. But this is just going to add on to what's already there. Now, we have our regenerative integrity field as one of our oh crap, I'm about to die type of buttons. Now, this again does come from the Kobali Samsar. If he doesn't have access to the Samsar, there's other consoles that he could use that are going to be great choices. Now, some of those are the Lucari Dorito console, it's the Restorative Protomatter, I think is the name of it. But anyway, I can't remember exactly without looking. But I always recommend, in a case like this, if you have access to this, slap it on the ship. It's a nice little oh crap, I'm going to die type of thing, and could help keep you alive. We have our Dynamic Power Redistributor module. This is fairly cheap to come by if you're not Federation aligned, otherwise you have to get it off the ship. If you have access to it, it's a nice offensive and defensive console. Both can be used either way, it just depends on the situation. Our Bioneural Gel Pack, this is going to round out our 3-piece for our isokinetic cannon and such. Take a look at that in just a second. But this is going to also give a minor bit of power to all of our subsystems, some additional shield capacity, but it's also going to give some Bridge Officer cooldown reduction. Now this will stack with other bits of BOF cooldown reduction that we're going to have in the build already. Now, the last thing we have is the Universal Chronotachyon Capacitor. Good luck saying that 5 times fast. That has some hull capacity, which is free HP, always nice to have, and a large chunk of engineering readiness, meaning that it's going to give a large amount of engineering cooldown reduction in that regard. So we have fairly good passives straight out of the gate. Now, as far as its use for tanking, I wanted to keep this on the build because this is going to essentially function as another AoE taunt for us. So he essentially has 2 taunts built into the ship in this regard. One of them being from the strategist thing in the skill tree, we'll take a look at in a minute, but also this particular console. It's also going to give some decent healing to him as well as some other nice benefits. So it's a very great console to have for this particular ship, something that in this case is actually going to lend to both sides of his tanking. It's going to lend to taunting, it's going to lend to threat generation, as well as damage recovery, by giving him some bits of healing, as we can see in the tooltip here. So it's a very potent console in that regard. Now, looking at our 3-piece bonuses here, we have our radiation damage for our 2-piece, as well as cooldown on the neutronic torpedo. Then we also have the isokinetic cannon that is going to get buffed by EPG, as you can see there. So, yeah. Very, very potent thing that does ignore shields. So, nice little kick in the pants. If he wanted to supercharge his exotic damage, he could pump this up even more. So, there's definitely options to go with this ship. So, that's what we have for our gear. Hopefully, dude, whenever you see this, you can kind of see which way I'm going with you. Now, as far as skills go, I'm not going to touch base on them in this video. I have a video up for that on the channel where we explain the basic skill tree that I'm using and why I picked the certain points that I did. Now, this is the one where I'm using extra bits into the impulse expertise because I typically fly a lot of bigger, beefier ships anyway. And that's why I have that. Now, for specializations, typically I found a lot of good luck with Intel Strategist, but in your case, dude, you might want to consider Miracle Worker Strategist if you find yourself in a situation where you're needing more healing than you do threat generation. But you've got options in this case. Then, getting into our traits, we're going to touch base on these. Now, I don't know what traits you're going to have available specifically, but these are some of the ones that I use. And we have beam training that you get for free. That's free beam damage to your weapons. We have elusive, which is going to make the ship harder to hit. That 601 seconds is actually a tooltip error. This is actually a permanent thing. And then point blank shot. This is one you can get from the House Peg mission for free category 2 damage based on how close you are to the target up to a certain maximum. Beam barrage are R&D crafting trait, one of them. Typically use one of those on the build. This is going to buff our beam damage in this case. Last ditch effort for tacticals. This is the career specific trait. For anybody else that may be interested in the build but you're not a tactical officer, there are other career specific traits you can call on in place of this one, and I can help you guys adjust if necessary. So whenever our go down fighting is active, this is also going to give some all damage resistance while that is active. Fleet coordinator for free damage based on how many people are in the team. A good day to die, which is another career specific trait for tacticals, which is going to allow the go down fighting to be used at any time, essentially giving us sort of another attack pattern type of thing, as well as damage reduction thanks to last ditch effort. Next we have our context is for kings. This is a good trait to have for people that are wanting survival because depending on whether you've been shot in the last second or not, you're going to get a benefit. If you've been shot, then you get damage resistance. If they haven't shot you, they give you Cat 2 damage boosting to smack them in the face with. So either way, you win when it comes to this trait. Now, I've gotten a lot of mileage out of Inspirational Leader as of late. Whenever I pop Bridge Officer powers, I'm potentially gaining 10 to most of my starship skills, which can stack up to 3 times. Then we have repair crews for the damage reduction and hull repair rate, so free damage negation and damage recovery in this regard. Now, as far as starship traits go, this is where it can get kind of pricey, especially when you consider things like Delta Prime, and also the weapon emitter overdrive from the Juggernaut. Now, if somebody's wanting to tank, I am going to recommend that they pick up Delta Prime, because you're going to be running Delta as your attack pattern anyway, and this is just going to give you that much more threat generation that you can pick up. Whenever your Delta is active, if you're getting hit, as you should be as the tank, this is going to give you potentially up to 15% chance and an additional 37.5% severity to smack them in the face with. And that's a pretty big deal for that. Now, our weapon emitter overdrive from the Juggernaut is free critical chance to our directed energy weapons whenever using a cannon or bridge officer, or cannon or beam enhancement. I don't know why I said BOF enhancement. But then we also have our emergency weapon cycle, which is going to reduce our weapon power cost by 50% and increase our firing cycle haste. Now, the thing to note with these two traits, the emergency weapon cycle and the weapon emitter overdrive, if you're using the two of them together, their energy cost enhancements are going to cancel each other out, and you will still have access to the critical chance and accuracy, as well as the firing cycle haste. We have our redirecting arrays, which can potentially extend the duration of our fire at will up to 15 seconds if we're getting hit. Then we have History Will Remember, which is going to give us a bit of all damage, a bit of hull regen, and a bit of maximum hull and threat generation by having this trait active. Now, this is worth to a tank up to 30% all damage, 30% hull regen, 30% additional maximum hull, and up to 300% threat generation while we have Threatening Stance active. So this is up to a free 300% threat gen that you're not going to get elsewhere. This comes off of the Narendra. Now, for anybody that may want to use the build and don't have access to Delta Prime or Weapon Emitter Overdrive, there are other traits out there that I can recommend and help you guys adjust to if needed. For our space reputations, pretty much our standard stuff: precision for the hit chance, advanced target systems for the severity, energy refrequencer for the heal. That's as long as we're shooting, we're going to be healing, and I have seen in a lot of instances and runs where this will out-heal even the Kobali set, because it's always healing. Tyler's Duality for additional critical chance, and then Magnified Firepower for the static Cat 2 bonus. Now, active reputations, pretty much personal preference. Some of the ones that I like to use are Quantum Singularity Manipulation for the science boosting, Anti-Time Entanglement as a nice little kick in the pants and slow to foes, based off of exotic damage, that sort of thing. And then our Biomolecular Shield Generator, which we can throw up to give some extra shield damage resistance, as well as our shield and hull, or shield regeneration being increased a substantial amount. So that's what we have in regards to traits. Now, we're going to touch base on our duty officers really quickly. Then we're going to look at our bridge officer powers, as well as some other things to consider when using a ship like this. Now, looking at our duty officers here. Now, the emergency con duty officer is something you can get out of the Phoenix boxes now. And whenever you activate emergency to engines, then this is going to greatly reduce, if not outright reset, the cooldown on evasive maneuvers. So a nice little get the heck out of Dodge type of duty officer. Then we have one of the DOFs that is going to increase critical severity when firing energy weapons. We have a ZMOC for his attack pattern Beta, Delta, and Omega cooldown reduction. Now, there are other versions of this guy out here. You don't have to use strictly a ZMOC now. If you can pick one of these up, they are very well worth it. Then we have 2 copies of the Adaku Khan. Anytime we activate our attack pattern Delta, he is going to give us a 100% threat generation for free. So this is 200% threat gen bonus right there, just between these two guys here. You can slot up to 3 of them. I'm only using 2 for this build, but the last thing I'm using is the Warp Core Engineer. Chance of temporarily improving ships, weapon, shield, and engines and aux power on use of any emergency power abilities. So I've gotten some decent mileage out of this guy as of late. Now, you might not like him, but I don't know. I've had good mileage out of him, so I can't complain in that regard. Now, touching base really quickly before we get into our actual Beta Thoridar and Japori runs, our final thoughts and stuff at the end of this, you actually have a tool available on your temporal ship that you're not going to get on too many others, and that is the Molecular Deconstruction Beam. Now, depending on what kind of counters it has, is going to be dependent on the effect that it gives you. So if you have offensive counters, it's going to deal physical damage. If you have defensive counters, it's going to heal you for a substantial amount. And if you have support counters, it's going to be a disable versus foes. So you essentially have 3 modes down here. And switching between these modes and knowing when to switch between them can give you greater survivability and greater offensive power depending on the situation you're in. So you have the offensive mode here, which is going to affect your turn rate, your flight speed, and such. Now, the downside is it does debuff you for a minus 20% incoming hull healing. So there is a downside to each of these modes that you're going to want to keep in mind. Now, the offensive one I would typically use if I'm looking for more, kick 'em in the pants type of thing. If I'm at a point to where I don't need a lot of healing in that regard, or I'm not looking to try to control through the use of a gravity well, then I might stick with this one. The next one is our defensive configuration. If you find yourself in a situation where you need to stay alive, you're just absolutely getting pounded, then this is the mode you're going to want to be in, because this is also going to give you some healing that you can use off of the Molecular Deconstruction Beam. This is going to be free shield power, a plus 20% incoming hull healing. Now, it does debuff your flight speed and your turn rate a bit, but I think that's a small price to pay for what you're getting here. And that debuff can easily be overcome elsewhere, and for that matter, so can the offensive configuration. Then, finally, we have the support configuration, which is 10 additional maximum aux power, 20% exotic damage, 40 control expertise in this regard, and it debuffs you for a 16.7 Cat 1 energy weapon damage. Now, this particular configuration I would swap back and forth to, depending on when I want to crack off a gravity well or something like that. Swap over, get the extra control expertise, the extra exotic damage, and that's going to make the control effect of my gravity well just that much more potent in this regard. So knowing when to switch between these 3 modes is going to allow you to adapt the ship better to the given situation that you need. Are you trying to control a lot of foes? Are you trying to just kick them in the pants? What are you ultimately trying to do? So this is something that you have as a tool that you don't want to forget about. And you'll see me in our Beta Thoridar and our Japori runs actually switching between these modes quite frequently. Then, getting into our Bridge Officer powers, a lot of it is really kind of our standard stuff, but like our Lieutenant Commander Tactical Station, our TAC team to redirect our shields, purge boarding parties, that kind of stuff. Our Fire at Will 3, this is going to smack anything within range with a beam. Then we have our attack pattern Delta. Now, the reason a tank is going to want to use Delta is it's based off of getting hit. If something shoots you, they're going to debuff themselves for a minus 30 all damage resistance rating and buff you for a plus 30 all damage resistance. So essentially you're leeching damage resistance off of them. And then as a tank, this is also going to, whenever we have our Adaku cons, whenever we pop this, This is going to increase our threat generation by a substantial amount, as well as give extra crit chance and severity. So it basically functions as a threat bomb, damage, giving you additional damage negation, and additional kick in the pants to foes. So very, very nice stuff. Then we also have our torpedo spread to throw some extra torps around. And then we'll take a look at our temporal powers last. There's reasons I picked the certain ones that I did. Then we have our emergency power to weapons 3, the weapon power and bonus damage is why we have this. Nice kick in the pants to foes. Our reverse shield polarity lets us recharge our shields off of incoming damage in a pinch. It is possible to heal all of your facings by redirecting energy if you're getting hit specifically in one section of the ship. Engineering team for some free healing. This is going to purge the viral matrix effects. This is going to heal your hull a good bit. And finally, our emergency to engines is a get the heck out of dodge type of thing, and that can also help reset our evasive maneuvers thanks to our emergency con duty officer. Then we have our science team to recharge our shields a bit, purge subnucleonic effects, hazard emitters for the heal over time, debuff removal, and the extra damage resistance that it gives. Then we have our gravity well, which is going to be our basic control power in this instance, and it's going to allow us to control the battlefield quite a bit. Now, as a tank in this instance, it's not going to be our main source of damage. It can deal some decent damage and function as a zero distance power, meaning it's going to generate more threat the closer, well, not necessarily the closer you are to foes, but a zero distance power basically means that as far as the enemy is concerned, you're right on top of them, because the thing dealing damage to them is right next to them. Now for our last powers, we have our recursive shearing. This is a nice kick in the pants to foes. Whenever it goes off, basically you pop this, it takes a snapshot of enemy health, and then does a fair amount of damage and reapplies to them. So if hypothetically you did 1,000,000 damage to a foe while this is active, this is going to store that and then smack them for another 1,000,000 points of damage. Then our last temporal power is our chronometric inversion field. And the big thing we have this for is the debuffing it can do to foes in that regard. And you can see it's going to debuff their flight speed as well as debuff their damage. Now that's the big thing we have here, is that it's going to debuff the damage they're doing, therefore sort of a pseudo damage reduction for you in this regard. So this is what we have for the ship here, and hopefully you can kind of see where we're going with this and such. The big thing here, pay attention to what mode you're in. Don't be afraid to switch between them in battle. And keep on your molecular deconstruction beam. There are a few instances you're going to see where this does mean the difference between life and death for us. Now there was one or two little hiccups in the video you're going to see in the beta thoridar and our japori runs, or certain powers didn't want to execute right away. That's more because of tribble than anything, but you can see we did recover from it. And in one of the runs, we actually had a weapon battery on the ship instead of our red matter capacitor, which affected us a good bit as well. But we corrected that in the second run. You guys are going to see that in just a second. But for now, folks, we're going to take a moment, check out our beta thoridar and our japori runs, see how the ship worked, and we will be right back. And while we're waiting on this epic loading screen, folks, we have a wolf with clan timber somewhere out there.
How's it going?
I think I've scared him just a little bit tonight.
He's only trying to do weirdness, that's all.
So, we're here in our beta thoridar. Let's go ahead and we'll start off in support mode. Just because why not?
Alright, you have fun gathering threat. Torpedoes are going out.
Wee bit of a scare there for a moment. Did not want to activate my reverse shield polarity for a second.
Ow. I don't know how I'm collecting that much threat, but that's bad.
And we'll go to defense mode.
And for everybody that watches my channel as well as his, there's a reason I'm using what looks like a very weird build. That'll get explained on my channel at some point. It already hasn't.
Yeah. He does lots of weirdness, which, to be fair, I kind of do too. Actually, we both do. Who are we kidding?
Yeah. But we do it on purpose a lot of the time.
Yeah. So, like I was explaining in the intro, this is actually a requested build from a viewer that was wondering how he can get a little bit more survival out of the Cronos. And there are actually ways to do it. We went over some of those in the beginning. Now, we're not actually using our standard 4-piece Kabali. We are still using a piece or two. Mainly to mix things up a little bit. So far, our biggest thing has been knowing when to swap between the modes.
Ow. Ow. And I'm dead. That was my own fault.
Which, that happens once in a while in here.
Yeah, I was way too close to a couple of Warp Core breaches.
Yeah, he went squish.
It's all good. This ship wasn't exactly meant for the survival aspects like blades.
Yeah. But, I want to get away from those guys for a moment.
I'm working on it.
Alright, back to defense. Alrighty, so one or two little hiccups there. There was a couple of close calls where it didn't seem to want to set off our powers, and Timber decided to Leroy Jenkins into a bunch of warp core breaches. But aside from that, the ship held up rather well for this portion of our test. The biggest thing that I did notice is trying to swap between the modes, knowing what to have active and when, is going to be one of our big issues for people looking to tank with this ship. And depending on what you have can mean the difference between being able to stay alive or getting your butt absolutely handed to you. But we're going to take a moment, we're going to let some of our abilities recharge, we're going to come back for our japori test, and we're going to see how well this ship can do under a parse, and see what kind of shenanigans he's got going on. But
Alright guys, now that we've done the breakdown, we're going into Japori Elite with Darkblade.
Giggity.
He's testing out a new tank configuration, so the parse we're going to be doing in here is going to help him on his channel. And we're going to see what kind of shenanigans. Some of these pieces, by the way, I just last minute fitted on this build before I recorded the intro and did this run. So we're going to see if this works out. Oh, and I have a few duty officer boosts. Just a few.
Just a few, huh?
But, I mean, if we're going to do some radiation... Would you get... Come on.
And in case y'all were wondering, that is a pooter from Jack Vale. I picked up a few of those on a whim just because, well, reasons.
Yeah, like I said, it's strange.
And for those folks on my channel, there was a slight screw up in the last video that explained a couple of issues that we noticed. And essentially, I did not have my red matter capacitor on the ship like I thought I did. So that's one thing that was actually slowing us down quite a bit. So I was actually using large weapon batteries. What is it? Oh god.
Oh, good. Just bring her back around.
And now that Timber has crapped his pants.
It's all good. It's all good.
So, what I was saying before I was rudely interrupted by these foes here who were about to die for their insolence is essentially I thought I had the red matter capacitor when in fact it was actually large weapon batteries. So we were missing out on some potential defensive bonuses due to the extra power that we were supposed to have had on the build. So that has been corrected for this particular parse. And this is actually what it's supposed to be doing at this point.
Whereas me, I'm just hoping this is working out the way I kind of want it to. But honestly, I will not know until the very end. I don't know where that last destroyer's going. He just stays still, that'd be great.
Well, he's fixing to have a case of the deads.
Yeah, but so am I.
How are you now?
Yeah, I might have pissed him off a little bit.
Little bit? You know what? You hurt.
Like I said when I did the intro to this video, I'm not entirely sure if this build even is going to work that well. And we won't know for a few more moments. Perfectly honest. Okay.
Smooth.
Granted, I had to fight a little bit for survival, so I probably had a little bit of a loss there compared to what I probably could have had, but... Okay, that's enough. Alright, let me bring up... I will mute you, Blade. Sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning, he gets a little crazy. And I say that because it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Alright.
And this is how I pester Timber.
Pretty much. Okay, so...
While I'm waiting on the parse.
This is also for Blade's channel, if you're watching. 118k for me, 60k even for Dark Blade. He'll go over the parse for himself, for his tanking everything. But I will say he had 90% of the attacks, at 90.58% to be exact. So he had pretty much almost all of the threat. I mean, by comparison, he had 93.9% of the heals. I only had 6% of the heals. So he had the threat. It was consistent. I just had a couple of moments where I had to wait for him to grab it. I had a crit chance of 44%. And it looks like from the parse it was actually pretty consistent. The point is not necessarily the damage I'm doing. The point of it is how much of this was radiation. Because 118k is not bad for this randomness that I just put together. So, I'm going to look through this for a second. It might take me a moment to fully break this down. To be completely honest. And I'm going to have to break out my trusty calculator.
His calculadora.
Alright, so the top radiation, of course, would be our Soliton Wave Impeller. It did 120 attacks with a crit rating of 35%, and it did a DPS of just over 15k. So 15k radiation. Then we've got the Radiant Detonations, which that's the Iconian trait that we ended up dealing with. And Radiant Detonation did 5248. Then let me see here. Chemosite Laced Weaponry 3 did 3799. Then we have Entangled Quantum Bombardment. That was the console from the Temporal Ship. It did 1871. Delphic Tear didn't do a whole lot. It did 1690. Probably because of positioning or distance calculations. The Neutronic Radiation Burst. The Neutronic Torpedo was 1464. Then Endothermic Inhibiting Beam did 694. Aceton Beam did 607. And it looks like that's all it's breaking down. Which I don't have a radiation on. Apparently the... Oh, and Withering Barrage. I forgot to add in Withering Barrage. Withering Barrage did 760. I don't have a number for the radiation off of the Kentari missile. Guessing that's kind of added together between the two of them, because it's doing 5597 right now, radiation damage over 3 seconds. So I'm not sure if that's guaranteed damage or if that was something that is supposed to only happen at certain times. It's listed as it's supposed to happen all the time. But I don't see it here. I just see Kentari mass-produced missile, and then I see rapid-fire missile volley 1. So I honestly do not see a radiation number for that. So that's probably missing somehow. But what we've got here, just off of what we can see, that is obvious until we can find where the radiation is that the Kentari missiles do. 31.2K of this parse is radiation damage from weapons. From weapon procs, from buff abilities, from burns from the torpedoes, and the Soliton Wave Impeller. Now, granted, the Soliton Wave Impeller is half of the radiation damage of the build, but it's a very powerful radiation weapon, is what it can do. But honestly, being 31K of the build is not bad. I mean, you're just shy of 120, so it means without all the radiation burns, you're only doing 90K. It was just straight weaponry. So the radiation was what put us well over the 100K mark. With decent survival, we had a max one hit of 210K with the Terran Task Force torpedo. So all in all, not bad for something that was kind of in the realm of mixed armament between cannons and torpedoes. There are a couple of things we probably could have done a little different for radiation. We could have used maybe the biomolecular photon. And I don't have it listed right now, but it also has a radiation. So there's a couple of things we could have done weapons-wise, with like thoron-infused weaponry. But quite honestly, this is not bad. Considering it's weapon-based and not exotic-based, this is kind of expected. Because it's a lot easier to get radiation damage with exotic, because of your deteriorating secondary deflector, and you have a few other things that can get boosted, that while you're using things like the neutronic torpedo, the biomolecular torpedo, the particle emission plasma, which is a theta radiation, which is boosted by EPG, you can get a lot higher numbers in your parse that are based off of radiation. All of these listed, and from what I've been able to see, they don't get boosted by EPG. They're just weapon procs that are boosted by all damage abilities and your weapon power and aux power, depending on what trait you're dealing with. Still not bad. So you can do something that burns the target quite a bit over time while you're hitting it with weapons to kill it faster. Hopefully this has been helpful for build 18. Build 19 is going to be another one of those probably, dang, that works builds. But we're going to get to that here soon. Until next time, this is Timberwolf and Darkblade, and we're signing off. I cut it off.
Alrighty folks, we're back from our beta thoridar and our japori runs. You guys can see how the ship held up. It was a little bit more squishy than I'm used to in that regards for some of these ships. Now again, for the guy that requested the build, Mr. Christopher Flynn, I left enough room for you to stick additional heals on there if you needed. You can see we used quite a bit of our stuff. You can see how we switched between the different modes as we needed to, whenever we wanted to crack off a stronger gravity well in that regard. So you have options to work with when it comes to this ship. Now, looking at our damage and stuff with the run, you can see here, let me move this in from off screen. You can see how the damage breakdown went. We scored about 60k in damage. Our good buddy Timberwolf did about a little shy of 120 in that regard. He was at 118. Now, as far as overall threat percentages and damage in, we actually took most of the damage in, close to 90% of it. We had 88% of the damage in almost. We took in 90.58% of the threat, so we were never in any danger of losing threat. The biggest danger in this case were the one or two potential little hiccups that actually happened, where it looked like we were going to die. That was actually the closest to danger we had in that regard. So, again, not our strongest outing of damage ever, but a very high threat percentage, so we were definitely doing our job in this case. Let's move in our combat analysis report. You kind of see how some of the damage broke down in that regard. You know, anti-proton, that sort of stuff. Then let's go down to our healing abilities. Now you can see how some of our healing abilities broke down. Once again, Energy Refrequencer was our top healing power, outdoing the Regenerative Integrity Field, the Kobali Capacitor on the core, and as well as even our Molecular Deconstruction Beam. So this is what I'm saying with Energy Refrequencer. If you're going to be a tank, as long as you're shooting, you're going to be healing in this regard. So this is going to help keep you alive. And you can see pretty much how everything broke down. We had pretty good healing going out. One or two instances where maybe we could have used a little more, perhaps, depending. But that'll be up to our end user if he decides he wants to actually stick additional healing on the ship. Because ultimately he's the one that's going to be flying it and has to be satisfied with what he's using. But whenever you see this dude, I hope you see kind of what I was going for with this particular ship. Now, the Cronos itself, it's a fun ship to fly. Probably not going to be my go-to ship on a regular basis, but for people that like the temporal ships, you'll definitely like the Cronos, I think, in that regard. It definitely has some potential. Like I say, I would like to see it be slightly less squishy than what it is in that regard, but, you know, it is what it is. It's still a good ship. It's still held up rather well, and that's kind of what we were going for. There is room to add additional heals onto here, such as the Lucari 4-piece, the Soul Defense set, or a Kobali 4-piece. So there are ways to get extra healing and stuff out of this ship whenever we want to. But anyways, Mr. Flynn, I hope you enjoyed the build that we put together for you. If you've got any other questions or concerns, or anybody else that may see this that's interested in the build, let me know. I'll do my best to address them. If you have any build requests, like I say, feel free to let me know. I do take requests here on the channel. Just let me know, hey, this is what I'm looking for, and can you help me out? And I'll do what I can for you. But for now, folks, this is Captain Blade J52, signing off.